Attracting and retaining employees, CEOs find it difficult today. Andrew Bartlow says there's no best HR practice. So what does he suggest to attract talent in high-growth companies? Let's find out. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we are going to interview an expert on HR who helps other HR people through his People Leader Accelerator. Welcome, Andrew Bartlow.
Dr. Burrus, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be with you.
So tell us, how do you help organizations articulate their HR people strategy?
Sure. Well, that's a mouthful. Your HR people strategy, and heck, why do you even need one if you're a small, high-growth organization? It's probably become something that more leaders of small and mid-sized businesses are aware of in today's environment, with the war for talent becoming increasingly competitive, the great resignation leading to a reshuffling of your labor force. Being clear about how you will attract and retain workers to your organization, whether you have a couple dozen employees or thousands, is increasingly critical. And to do that well, you should have a plan. And so that's the people plan. What are we doing that is compelling enough to cause workers to leave their existing jobs? There's very low unemployment rate worldwide and here in the States. And what are we doing to encourage workers to stay with us? So being clear about that is critical for business, and that's something that I help organizations with, as well as their HR leaders work through as well.
So give us some examples of different sizes of companies, how they do that.
Sure. Well, the output isn't that different, but the message and the delivery might be. So let's use, for example, I have a client that has several thousand employees across 20 different sites, mostly here in the United States. What are they doing? I won't use their name, but they are a theater and restaurant chain. They combine cool movies with great food and drink. So what do they do that is compelling to draw workers to them and keep their workers with them? And so the path is very similar around some introspection. What's unique and different about us? What would be compelling about that to the type of workers that we might want to attract? And what's the message that we can put out in our job postings and have our hiring managers and recruiters talk about as we speak to those workers? And it's more than marketing messages. It's more than perks and programs. It's authentically delivering whatever that promise is. So very specifically, this particular organization flat out has a cool factor to it. They're special because they have this unique brand and they do movies and food differently than other types of venues in the space. So people want to be associated with that brand. And so giving their employees experiences that are in alignment with that brand, like, hey, have a private concert or a private showing at the theater, or have a hands-on experience with your friends and your coworkers as part of your employment at this organization. That draws much greater connection to the business and the brand, and that is compelling for people to want to be part of it and want to stay there.
Andrew, so for hands-on experience with friends, for the employees, okay, so they have an opportunity to bring their families and friends to an event. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Yeah, well, and that applies to this one specific organization where their brand is specifically experiential and cool. Now, there are other organizations of different sizes with different brand traits that will have different compelling propositions. I have another group I work with. They only have about 50 employees, and they are building the world's fastest rocket, the hypersonic jet. Again, won't use the name, but you can probably guess who they are. if you know anything about that space. And what's special about them is that they have amazingly advanced hardware. And you're able to get hands-on if you're in that space, very different than movies and beer. This is a group that's trying to be compelling to PhD aeronautical engineers. And so what experiences can they offer in employment that would cause someone to leave their existing job at NASA or a university or what have you to come be part of their organization? And why would people stay? So the answers by employer will vary, but it's about being authentic to who you are that will be compelling to the workers that are already with you and the workers that you want to come join you.
So thank you for those two examples. Great. So we get clarity. These definitely to attract and retain is one of the most important issues that HR leaders encounter. What other issues that they struggle with and how would they address them?
Yeah, well, the list is long today. I might call this the golden age of HR in some ways, where there's more awareness with the worldwide pandemic and the Great Resignation and social justice issues being more in the zeitgeist than in the past scores of years. And HR is being looked to have the answers for those many issues. It goes beyond attraction and retention, remote and hybrid workplace. How do we do that? What's the right approach? What do we pay people during the midst of the Great Resignation? So HR is being stretched by requests and demands from all sides. And some of these are in areas no one truly has any deep experience in. So for HR leaders, as well as for senior executive business leaders, the challenge is, how do you help your organization meet its goals during this environment? And I think a lot of that comes back to clarity in what you're trying to accomplish, and then clear alignment around your priorities, lining up your resources with your priorities and plans.
Okay. Do you have an example there?
Sure. Well, here's an example from one of my clients. I work with their head of HR. They're a fashion retailer, mostly in the United States, luxury clothing. And they have about 500 employees across a couple dozen sites, but do a lot of e-tailing. Very early stage HR function. They're still trying to pay people correctly and offer the right benefits operationally, nascent recruiting function. And I was working with their HR leader to try to identify her people plan and their priorities. And I asked, what are your top 3 things? And she listed about 35 things. So, well, okay, all these things probably need to get done. What are your top 3? And after a lot of back and forth, it was clear that she was just really struggling trying to narrow down the focus. And ultimately, she said, we're trying to implement a learning management system. We really need training and learning to be part of the core of our organization. Okay, well, why? Well, because I think it's important, because I believe in it. So, all right, well, let's take a step back and think about, what does your organization need right now to help it meet its goals? And I know enough about their organization to say, well, they're trying to beef up their e-commerce presence. They're trying to bring on board a few critical hires in digital marketing and build up their omni-channel e-commerce presence. And they're losing workers like crazy because they are mandating that they come back into the office physically 2 or 3 days a week. And so I encouraged her to think hard about whether that learning management system was something that she had a passion about or whether her organization really needed it. And so specifically, if you're a functional leader, whether it's HR or anything else, be very certain that the things that you're working on, that there's a manageable list of your most important priorities and that they directly link to what's most important for your organization as a whole. Otherwise, you're going to get caught up in the whirlwind of too many demands and find yourself moving 30 things an inch rather than 3 things a mile.
Is it hard for some HR who really are very people-oriented like she and learning and personal development to really say, okay, that would be really nice to have, but basically the company has more hands-on needs like you just said, they're losing workers, they need to hire specialists, they need their e-commerce channel beefed up, for example, which are very operational issues.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it hard for HR to get to that short list? Absolutely. I think harder than most. And I think that's insightful that you call that out. Many people enter the human resources profession with a humanistic approach, with a service mindset, are often really skilled, hardworking, caring individual contributors that move into leadership roles because they are caring and service oriented. However, that can often work against you as a senior leader or executive when you're trying to balance the interests, often competing interests of different stakeholders. And if you are only serving the interests of the employees or at the expense of your shareholder, investor, and executive stakeholders, then you may not be taken seriously. You may not have the credibility, influence, or resources to get some things done, which is what a lot of HR leaders find themselves in that position where they're continually advocating to do things for the employees, but don't effectively link those activities to what's most important directly for the business at the moment.
Yes, and the issue of leadership, because this is an executive coaching leadership podcast, what kind of leadership development or issues that most companies have, and how can a HR convince upper management? For example, this company, omni-channel e-commerce that they need to develop, they're losing, workers, so the turnover is very high. Okay, and let's say a more intangible issue could be that the leadership is not right for the situation. For example, if a company grows so quickly, they're experts, they love their company, but they don't know how to lead people. And yet, who's the last person that realizes they can't really lead people is the person their sponsor.
Yeah. So the question is, how in the HR seat do you help organizations identify who's right at the right moment?
Let's say, for example, if there's a leadership issue that the leader is not really, he's causing some of these high turnover situations, what do you suggest to the HR how to handle that?
Well, when a founder or senior executive builds and grows an organization, as an entrepreneur myself, I carry this weight with me. Your organization is in many ways your identity. It's your ego. It's your retirement that you've borrowed against and the friends and family that you've committed to. There's a special relationship between a founder entrepreneur and their business. And what I find repeatedly is that those founders and entrepreneurs are remarkably successful at driving initial growth. The visionary execution early on can actually become a bottleneck and threaten to strangle the growth of their company if they're unable or unwilling to delegate and empower and set priorities and manage through some basic systems and processes, which very reliably leads to worker dissatisfaction, turnover, attrition. And in HR, if you have an HR leader at one of these growth stage organizations, is in a really tough spot because it's their boss, the founder, who's responsible for the success of the organization, who's now holding it back. And how do you help coach and mentor your boss? Boy, that's a tough one. Largely, I'd say you need to be able to speak truth to power when you're in one of these seats. When you're in a human resources leadership role, that's what a big part of your job is, delivering the feedback that can help the organization be successful, even if that is criticism. So it needs to be appropriately worded, even if that's criticism to the leadership.
Absolutely. That's an art.
It's an art and it's a science, right? You talk about executive coaching. I'm executive coaching certified as well. It's really hard to be an effective internal coach, which is, I think, in part why this vocation has sprung up and gained more attention and awareness of executive coaches who are outside the hierarchy of the organization. It's easier to speak truth to power. You might get someone that's more experienced and a true professional in this area versus also trying to balance recruitment and benefits and payroll and employee relations. If this is all you do every day, chances are you may be more skilled in it. And as you have multiple clients, rather than the one boss that you're trying to shine a light on, some of their behaviors that are holding the organization back, you're in a tough spot.
So one of my coaching expertise is helping brilliant jerks transform into inspiring leaders, okay?
Yep.
So the jerk is easily identified. What is a lot harder is if the jerk is the CEO.
Right.
So I say that affectionately because I'm really believe that they should be helped so that they can leverage their skills and just modify enough their behaviors that they can succeed well beyond what they're doing currently. But that's what I wanted to refer to as when the HR has the CEO that is really turning people around, causing the turnover to a large degree.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like you just said, they have to be at ease to speak the truth to power, develop a very close, I imagine, and caring relationship so that they see that feedback as a means to succeed rather than being critical.
Well, that's right. And I'd suggest that behind every brilliant jerk is a foundation of good intentions.
Right. I totally agree with you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Chances are that brilliant jerk doesn't want to be a jerk, but desperately wants their organization to be successful. And so appealing to their deep-seated desires, like, okay, what makes you tick? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Well, let's talk about how this behavior might be working against you. And what are some options of some other things that we could do? In my book, Scaling for Success, I write about two archetypes of a entrepreneurial leader, the mule driver and the prophet, which are two, somewhat tongue-in-cheek archetypes of different ends of the spectrum. That the prophet is the visionary who can collect a great team and get capital raised, but has a really tough time getting their hands dirty, breaking ties, and making decisions. That's the prophet. The mule driver is the other end of the spectrum, a different type of brilliant jerk, which is someone who wants to do everything themselves and is a big time driver, holds everybody too tightly accountable, and is hard on people. And so those are two leadership types that I've seen repeated again and again in high growth organizations.
Another curiosity I have is that, Andrew, your company is called Series B Consulting. Tell us why you chose that name.
Oh, sure. Well, and thank you. Yeah. Series B refers loosely to the venture capital round of fundraising. So in VC terms, seed is your friends and family round, and then Series A is your first round of institutional capital, and Series B is your second round. And often, startups will raise 4, 5, 6 rounds before they eventually and hopefully go public. But what I find is that around Series B is when things start to get really interesting from a people management and organizational perspective.
And why is that?
You've raised enough money at that point that your team has reached a certain size where you have managers managing managers, and your founders have some space between themselves and the frontline people that are doing the work. Chances are at or around B, you're hiring department leaders, you're 100-ish people, call it 50 to 150 people that work at the organization. And around that size, you have a lot of organizational complexity that's new to you. And so in my human resources and management world, that becomes a particularly pivotal time.
And so how do you help them? You mentioned
Sure.
that there is no one best HR practice. So how do you use a template and adapt it to the different situation?
Sure. Well, great call out. There's no simple checklist. Here are the things that you do at Series A or B. And boy, plenty of VC firms try to provide the playbook.
Yeah.
And, playbooks can be directionally helpful in terms of here's some things to think about. But if you apply the book without critical thinking, that's where you can really get into trouble. So it's largely about working with those leaders to think through and pressure test the changes that are necessary for their organization to continue to thrive. So we look at culture, we look at stage appropriate hires, we look at organizational structure, how and when do you hire what types of roles, how will you communicate priorities and clarity to your ever-growing team. And there may be different answers for that, but those are common challenges at that stage.
I see. That's very interesting. Mm-hmm. We're coming to the end of our podcast, unfortunately. I just want to ask you one more question. How do you prioritize high growth organizations?
How do you prioritize in high growth organizations?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it starts by prioritizing. What many high growth organizations struggle with is trying to do too much at once, trying to move the 30 things an inch, trying to add new product features while adding new customers, while doubling the size of your team, while experimenting with content marketing. What's most important right now? Other things may need to happen. Other things will happen. But being really clear about priorities is the largest hurdle that many high growth organizations have. There are not enough resources, not enough people, more so not enough time and attention to do too many things at once. So how do you prioritize? Number one, it's just a commitment to doing it is the first, biggest, and most important step.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Where can people get a hold of you?
I would encourage your listeners to link in with me. Follow me on LinkedIn, Andrew Bartlow. And if you are a human resources professional, check out People Leader Accelerator.
Thank you very, very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
We would love to know what you thought of this podcast. Write us an email at drkatrina with a K at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. We would love to hear what you liked and what we could improve. This podcast has been sponsored by excellentexecutivecoaching.com.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burrus' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.